the winter conference in collaboration with the NES, the LLYF, PPMF, and on the topic of the theme, revisiting zooacademic discourse in the 21st century. Before we move on to the program, I would like to first read out the program highlight for today. The first session, which we are gonna start now, the welcome address by Swan Muan Lian Ton Singh, followed by talk on zooacademic discourse by Dr. Samuel G. Ngaite, faculty member, Department of Philosophy from Manipur University. And after the talk, there will be a short break, which will be around 15 minutes for light refreshment. And after the refreshment, we will start with the second session. In the second session, participants will be formed into groups for discussion. And after the discussion, there will be a closing remarks by the collaborators, and we will end the session with a vote of thanks. And without much further ado, let me invite Mr. Swan Muan Lian Ton Singh to deliver the welcome speech.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Hello, everyone. As a member of Zoe Academy, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the first winter conference organized by Zoe Academy in collaboration with NFI and European Union, PPMF, NEST, and Lamka Young Leaders Forum. We are also pleased to have with us several academics and research-oriented organization leaders and scholars with us today. And through this conference, we would like to engage with all of you under the theme Revisiting Zoe Academia Discourse in the 21st Century through our main host, Samuel Z. Ngaite in the first session, and through an open and constructive dialogue in second session. So this conference's theme is based on the current academic and scholarly challenges in the contemporary age, as it intends to build connections across various scholars and research groups in the region. The key reflections as indigenous those scholars are that we would like to deal in this conference would be: what questions have we asked in the past? On what methods did we answer these questions? What do we ask in a complex web of socio-political and economic dynamics that endanger our indigeneity and so on? So with this being said, I'm pleased to welcome you to our guest speaker for the first winter conference, Samuel Z. Ngaite. Dr. Dr. Samuel is an interdisciplinary scholar whose research interests include continental and Indian philosophy, philosophical anthropology, and dialogic methodology. He currently teaches philosophy at Manipur University, Chandipur, and pursues research work in the northeast of India. His recent publication with Ruben Paulian Ding in 2022 is on Christianity and Empire in South Manipur Hills and One Encounter and the Dialogic Zhou peoples. So let us welcome him with a round of applause as he takes the stage. Yeah, Usam, you can take the stage. Yeah.
I'll share my laptop, so it's going to be quite boring. But let's start anyway. Thank you, Malian and Archie, for trying to up. I'd also like to thank again Ketania, NEST, Partnership in Procrastination Foundation, Lamkayan Leaders Forum, and National Foundation for India, and for allowing me the moment to kickstart this discussion. I don't think I'll be hosting, like Malian said, but I'll be just presenting some hopefully controversial points so that we can analyze the discussion later on. So I'm very privileged to be allowed to kickstart this discussion. All of the organizations and the names that I've read out have been doing incredible work in, especially in Lamka context, for a very long time now. And I think especially with the focus that Zoe Academia has, I think they are trying to expand that reach as well. When they first approached me for this seminar, I was very hesitant to participate as a speaker, simply because there are much more distinguished professors, associate professors, etc., and even elders who are much more specialized than I am. And also because my primary area of research, not necessarily my interest, but my primary area of research is in the Indian and continental philosophical traditions. And the reason I ended up doing that is I remember the advice I received when I was setting out my doctorate. I had a few mentors and also to be supervisors who advised me to study another tradition which is outside the Northeast. No? And so the argument that they gave was, it is important to study something difficult so that I can get the conceptual tools necessary to appreciate my own tradition later. And I remain grateful to them for that advice because that helped me really enlarge what I call my conceptual vision. No? I remain convinced today, of course, that the only way to understand ourselves is necessarily through the detour of the other, which is a theme I'll keep repeating. Even more so in academics, because you have no choice in academics not to master the disciplines in which you are located and then transcend them to find yourself. No? So the task is quite difficult. One cannot understand the Zoal academically. We can understand the Zoal in many ways, but not academically without mastering the disciplinary traditions within which one is located. Again, these are all my opinions. You can differ with them. We can have a conversation with them later on. As I mentioned, as you can also see from the program, I think this first session is designed to just be a conversation starter. And I understand my role as simply presenting some things that are a little bit controversial, maybe uncomfortable discussion points, to hopefully initiate later on a lively discussions. And I look forward to the discussion much more than this presentation. So rather than provide an exhaustive analysis on the topic itself, I will present some very general academic concerns about the nature of Zoe scholarship in particular, that I believe is important for us to engage critically in our contemporary context. And again, we already have a general theme for the seminar today, revisiting Zoe academic discourses. We can unpack them word by word, but what I like to do today is just discuss two issues that arise out of it. No? One is, what is the nature of the problematic in Zoe scholarship? Again, here I make a distinction between research problem and problematic, because research problem is the problem that you want to investigate. Research problematic is when you theorize what you want to investigate. No? So what is not the problem, but what is the problematic in Zoe scholarship? And ultimately for us, what is the task of not just writing, but academic writing, which is again different from other kinds of writing. Okay, so we'll try and engage those as best as we can. Let me just try and change my... Again, I don't have a PowerPoint. I'm sorry for that. I apologize for that. Without PowerPoints, it becomes a little bit boring. But let me try and share as much as I can some of the important points. No? What is the problematic in Zoe scholarship? One of the more important challenges that the concept notes also alluded to or highlighted was the question of the marginality of the Zoe indigenous people. No? Again, we can understand this marginality in many ways. There is territorial marginality because of the fragmentation of the Zoe country. There is cultural fragmentations, cultural marginality today. Most of us are tribals wherever we are placed. There is political marginalization. Many people are fighting. Many groups are still fighting for even autonomies and sixth schedule provisions and things like that. But more significantly, what I am interested in is the epistemic marginality. Okay, the epistemic marginality, the marginality that exists within academic discourse or the academic institution. So what do I mean by that? For when we look at traditions such as ours, or when we look at traditions such as those of the Zoes that have been oral as far as we remember, the late introduction to... Should we welcome them and let them say something, or we can pause for a bit, no? Okay, let's continue. So for traditions such as those of the Zoes that have been oral as far as we remember, the late introduction to literacy and the even later introduction to the academic world meant that the Zoe world, by the time we start to write, by the time we start to even think about writing, is already effectively mapped out and represented by sources that were external to these traditions. No? So basically, if we put it simply, our stories were written by someone else. besides the territorial displacement that we all know happens with our division in three post-colonial nation states, India, Myanmar, and Bangladesh, the reductions of these, what I call dynamic oral traditions into written accounts and reports have transformed us from natives of our own lands to savages at the edge of empires, and whose status as the uncivilized other, which is us, became the official validation of our identity. So our identity was validated politically as the uncivilized other. Later on, we became tribals, etc. But we are still trying to find our way to becoming those in and of in the way that we understand ourselves. We are still on that path, no? So these imposed colonial identifications and markers began to construct a parallel discursive world that was different from the lived realities of the zones. Okay, so this is one of the important points that I want to raise. By epistemic marginality, I mean these colonial identification and markers or colonial sources began to construct a parallel discursive world that is different from our lived realities. So somebody is writing about us, which is different from the lived realities that we have. Again, this is not to dismiss the early scholarship on the zones by the British, but we have to acknowledge the biases with which this new governable world was constructed, and it demands critical engagement. You know? The profusion and exhaustive nature of these studies by the British, by early writers, especially during the colonial intrusion, coupled with the time it took for the zones to interrogate and even challenge these misrepresentations, which took a very long time, constituted a problematic that will come to mark or define Zoe scholarship and sport. And I just want to talk a little bit about what I mean by these representations and what are the implications of this. First, if we look at Zoe scholarship today, the foundation of what we call Zoe academic discourse is ultimately a non-Zoe discourse on the Zoes. No? Non-Zoe discourse on the Zoes means the foundation of Zoe academic discourse is written by non-Zoes. Okay, so what we call Zoe writings, or maybe to be more precise, we can call it writings on Zoe, can be traced to the works of early travelers. There are Chinese historians, Italian missionaries, etc., and the colonial ethnographers and administrative officers. Thus, our primary source of data that we immediately engage is already biased from the beginning. No? Again, all of these accounts, as we are well aware, are very good accounts, but they were written to further a particular standpoint or interest. Okay, so the works of the colonial officers were primarily concerned with information of military relevance. They did a lot of good ethnographic work, but they were committed to the validation and expansion of empire first and foremost. Their agenda is to expand empire, not to, and also to create governable spaces so that they can rule over us. So they were not as interested in us and our ways of life, our practices, our rituals, as they were interested in the validation and expansion of their empire. Okay, so that is what I mean by the biases that is already at the core. We can, again, perhaps make a clarification here regarding our use of the adjective Zoe when we say Zoe discourses, Zoe scholars, etc., because this is something that can be understood in various ways. One is Zoe discourses can be understood as a discourse about Zoe as a subject matter, and it could also be discourses by Zoe people on a variety of topics that has nothing to do with the Zoe world. No? And again, here, even Zoe scholarship, I think this is something, or Zoe scholars is something that we need to continue to clarify, because right now, the Zoe scholars that we talk about, the people who have written on the Zoes are not Zoes. No? They are missionaries, they are travelers, they are colonial ethnographers, they are officers of the British Empire, etc. Okay, so again, that is why we have to continue to try and clarify what we mean by Zoe discourses, what we mean by Zoe people, Zoe scholars, etc. Again, I don't want to talk about this distinction because this is something that we already know, but let's move on. It is, maybe just to point out, it is perhaps important to caution here that while we are discussing these issues as Zoe scholars, I think all of us who are present here are hopefully all Zoe scholars in the sense of we are Zoe by blood. What ultimately qualifies us as Zoe, especially in the academics, is not that we are Zoes by blood. No, it is simply the standard of our academic work. Okay, rather than our default identification as Zoe by blood. So being Zoe, again, by blood does not prevent us from being biased, and also does not privilege us as an insider in any sense either. No. So the task is to write better than the British. And the question is also, can we do that? Okay. So that is the first point. The second point is the official manner in which the colonial accounts were utilized and reinforced. Again, utilized, and I use those terms, utilized and reinforced, because when an identity becomes official, then it has some sort of a textual authority that becomes our identity. Today, we identify ourselves as tribals because that is the official identity that is given to us. No? Whereas to identify ourselves as Zo, we will need to keep validating it, because Zo is something that not most people will not recognize, especially officially. No, they'll recognize their tribe names, but probably not Zos. Okay, so the official manner in which the colonial accounts were utilized and reinforced bestowed a form of textual authority that we now have to consider in our transition from oral to a writing culture. So we are not just, we don't have the privilege of just writing about our culture. Before writing, we have to engage what is already written about us. Okay, this is why I think Bianca has said we often ended up adopting the colonial school of thought. And she actually argues and says we are still stuck in the colonial school of thought. And to some extent, you have to agree at least till the early 20th century and so on. No? This was perhaps because early Zo literates, and I don't say early Zo scholars, but literates, did not have the right exposure to be able to articulate their critical reflections. And this is purely because they don't have the right exposure, they don't have the right opportunities to get educated in the way that we do today. Okay, they were not trained to employ standard methods of academic writing, and they often ended up adopting the categories that were imposed on them, sometimes even without realizing it. So if colonial accounts calls us Chin, we are Chin. If they call us Lusais, we are Lusais, and so on and so forth. No, that changed later when we started to write, but for a very long time we accepted them quite uncritically, even without realizing it. Okay, so and that is the power of the discourse of the British, no, or the power of the discourse of people who are again in power ruling over us. So the story of the Zos continue to be told predominantly from the perspective of the British in India, from the nation state of India, also in India, and in Burma, in places like Burma and Bangladesh, etc., and very rarely on the Zos' own terms, even when the Zos started writing. And therefore, it is crucial, therefore, to look at the conceptual and substantive contribution of a work, precisely because even a Zo scholar can end up promoting, endorsing, and adopting colonial perspectives quite uncritically. Okay, so the way to know a scholar and the way to identify a Zo scholar is by looking at his conceptual and substantive contribution, because sometimes a Zo scholar might sound more British than the British themselves. No, and again, we have all kinds of people like that. We have all kinds of writers like that. Okay, so the fact that we continue to use colonial categories in our political self-understanding suggests we are still unable to excavate the pre-colonial Zo world, and this is something that not many people are able to do. If you actually look at post-colonial and colonial studies on Zos, there are a lot of works, but not many studies on the pre-colonial world. No, you can count the number of books by maybe even just your one hand. No, so there are not many texts that writes on the pre-colonial Zo world, and most of them borrow from one another. Okay, so again, that is why we are unable to excavate the pre-colonial Zo world and even the remnants of our Zo indigeneity from these periods. So our history, in some sense, effectively starts only in the late 19th or maybe in the 20th century, and we are revisiting the history only in the 21st century now. No, so we are still very young in terms of academics. Okay, again, the third point, these challenges, some of the things that we shared, resulted in an over-reliance on the perspective of secondary resources, or an over-reliance on the perspective of colonial school of thought. The non-existence of comprehensive ethnographies carried out by the Zos, combined with this over-reliance, made the British, the Burmese, the Indian, and possibly even the Chinese archives even more valuable than it should be. No? So now, if we want to research on any of our history, these archives, British archives, Burmese archives, Indian archives, are necessary for us to understand ourselves. And that is the privilege we give to them. Okay. So which also means the difficulty of accessing these archives begin to limit the stories we tell about ourselves. So we rely on these archives, but we are not able to access these archives. Like, for example, most of the archives in the British Library, we are not able to access simply because we don't have scholarships to go there, for example. Even if you go there, you will not be able to access all of them, etc. And Chinese archives will not be able to access. Some of the people from outside are not able to access the archives here for a very long time because of inner line permit and so on and so forth. No, so our study relies on other people's archives, and even those other people's archives, we are not able to access them 100%. Okay, so that is the kind of epistemic marginality that we are talking about, which I alluded to in the beginning. So that is why we continue to rely heavily on accounts to supplement our respective studies, such as Robert Reed's The Lusai Hills on the Frontier Areas Bordering Assam, etc. All of these books that we know, Thomas Lewin, A Fly on the Hill, How I Helped Govern India, and other such texts. But if you actually look at the primary texts for our research, there are not many zoo texts or practices that we consider important in the same degree as we consider all of these texts, like Robert Reed's, etc. Is there an equivalent of Robert Reed for us? I don't think there is yet. No. So this is again perhaps where we can interrogate what we understand by oralities and indigeneity. A friend of mine who's also here participating in this conference, a seminar, once remarked that we may actually be very hard pressed to find out what is indigenous about us today. You know, we float around the idea that we are indigenous communities, but if we look at what it takes to have to be an indigenous community, there is a very specific relationship that indigenous communities have with the natural environment around them, which we don't have a problem abusing and using it for other sources. Okay, so we don't have the relationships that we have with our rivers, the relationships that we have with spirits are long gone and discarded by us for various reasons. No, so in a way, he's right. We are no longer indigenous in that sense, but we can still use the indigenous tag for political reasons because we are still tribals in some sense. Okay, but that is itself also problematic. Again, in terms of orality, also we need to understand what we mean by orality, because just because we don't write doesn't mean we are oral cultures. No? Or maybe we are, but when you look at Indian traditions, for example, especially Hindu traditions, when they talk about orality, they are talking about the method of passing down their sacred Vedic texts very meticulously through memorization and chanting. No? There are people whose life calling is to just memorize and chant their whole lives. Some of the Brahmin priests are set out for them. Okay, so the only calling that the Brahmin priests have is to memorize and chant what has been passed down by their ancestors to the next generation. Do we have people like that? We don't, right? So when Hindus talk about orality, they even say that writing is pollution. They don't consider writing as authoritative as much as orality. And so when we talk about oral cultures, we also need to, we might not have this kind of civilizational practices, but we need to know what validates our oral practices. If we say storytelling validates our oral practices, how do we tell stories? No, it is not just my father told me when I'm about to sleep, etc. That is not academically enough for you to say that storytelling is part of our oral practices. Okay, so that is something that everybody who's a parent practices. No, so it is not unique in that sense. So we need to investigate again all of this. All of this, along with the advent of Christianity and our introduction to literacy through mission schools, most of the people who were first literates were all literates from mission schools. So all of this gave rise to what I call two kinds of scholarship that defined the genre of early Zo literature or early Zo scholarship. Okay, first, what is the first kind of scholarship? The colonial school of thought, which was more ideological, that is state-centric than academic, influenced the way those scholarships were also produced. Again, this is ideological. Although they did good ethnographic work, it is ideological because the written works served the state. No, it was for the empire that they were written. So they were not academic. They can be academic. They're good enough to be academic, but they were ideological accounts. Okay, so between these ideological accounts, colonial categories, and those that sought to challenge them, and there are many post-colonial scholars that challenge these accounts, was a scholarship that was more political than academic in its orientation. So we started to also copy the British in producing political accounts of ourselves, which is not very academic. No? If you look at, again, these are our core texts, but if you look at the work of Wumson's Zoo History, Or if you look at even T. Gauguin's Zomi history and other things, there are many other texts. We don't need to mention all of them. Especially these two stand out in their attempts to try and encompass the entire Zoe world in a comprehensive manner. But they were what Bianca calls texts written by self-taught historians, no? And Bianca should know because she knows, no? So writing with very particular goals to stop the infighting, to spark reunification consciousness, and so on and so forth. Wumson definitely wrote because he wanted to stop both the infighting and also try and revive a reunification consciousness, or try to spark a reunification consciousness. So it's not very academic in that sense. It's very good, but it's not academic. And he's not a historian, but he's writing a history book. No? If you look at most of the texts written even by our scholars who are historians, they are not historical texts. Okay, again, we don't need to go into the details of that. The point is, this eventually gave rise to a very low and utilitarian view of academic work. I remember when I was doing my doctorate, for example, somebody just came to me in our conversation about art culture. We always talk about art cultures, etc. And he said, why don't you just come up with new evidence, invent new evidence, and produce that as evidence to support our political causes, no? And you can do that if you want, but that is not academic work, no? So I had to hesitantly point out that the work of an academic is not experimental in that sense. You cannot flout around with integrity in that sense, no? And so it is not even academic writing is not even journalistic writing where you're just describing, because you need to continue to interpret. And when you're involved in academic, you need to understand from as many viewpoints as possible to enrich your own knowledge. Okay, so having an agenda when you are writing academic work is not helpful in the long run, no? So again, this might be besides the point, but I was just having a conversation recently with an elderly scholar who is also a church leader about the differences, especially in theological education in various places. And he pointed out the difference between Europe and the Americas. And this is something that I've also seen and experienced. While in Europe, if you, especially in the UK, if you do a PhD, you will be examined at the highest standards. It doesn't matter if you're doing a theological degree. It doesn't matter if you're doing from an institute, which is not an university. Your examiners will be from Oxford and Cambridge, and they will not let you go. They will not pass you if you cannot rise to their standard, no? So every thesis that comes out from there, from the UK, is Oxford, Cambridge level, because your examiners come from that. And that is why many people who study there come back with an MPhil degree, no? MPhil degree is the degree you get because they don't want you to go back empty-handed. But in the US, this doesn't happen. Especially in the US, especially in theology. That is why if anybody were to ask me whether to do theology in the US or UK, there is the answer, no? It depends on what you want to do. But usually in the US, everybody comes back with a PhD degree, even if the degree, and you will have read some of the PhD work, even if the standard of work is not as good, maybe even worse than some Indian universities. Okay, so again, these are, we are just trying to talk about the standards, etc. But also, us as a scholar, the less intensive and training and exposure our work is, the less respect we have for the craft of writing an academic institution. And so if you don't respect your training, it's very easy to copy, paste from here and there, etc., and things like that, no? And then you don't end up having any original contribution. Okay, so again, we don't have to point out how little scholars today value their own field, and how in the attempt to write out of necessity for promotions. Again, this is a big issue now that scholars everywhere are discussing, because to get promoted, you have to publish. And so people produce a lot of work, but no original contribution, no? I've been in many WhatsApp groups where what scholars talk about is the amount of pay they get, how to do the text, and so on and so forth. There is not even one WhatsApp group where they discuss academic contributions, no? So again, we are talking about the low value that we have of academia in general. And even as a society, we don't place much importance on academia. Again, also because sometimes the scholars are not able to rise up to the standard, no? So therein lies both the problems, etc. But our marginality, even in the academia, should not mean that our academic integrity is compromised. Again, the difficulty is the more marginal we are, the greater the responsibilities, because the farther you are from the discourse, the more discourse you have to read. No? So again, that is the challenge. So that's the first point. The second point is the introduction of literacy to the missionaries and their mission schools, which is very controversial, and not many people like to speak about it. I don't like to speak about it. But what they produce is what is often known as ahistorical manner of Christian narrative. Ahistorical meaning we just believe that Christian narratives doesn't have a history. It is the Spirit of God who is changing us and bringing us into modernity and all of that. No. So again, this specific position is a 19th or 20th century position, which comes from a particular idea called Enlightenment evolutionary thinking. Okay, again, so the more Christian writings we have, the more they distance us from who we really are. The more sometimes we are ashamed of ourselves, which again now there are many people who write on contextual and tribal theology, so that criticism might no longer be valid. But the rise of very good contextual theologians everywhere in Asbury and other places have somehow helped us reintrospect and negotiate our cultural and religious identities, and maybe even resurrect some of our pride in our old cultures. But before that, everything that has to do with anything that came before Christianity was something that we were willing to throw away into the unknown. No? Now we are trying to revive those back, thankfully, because of contextual and tribal theologies, etc. Okay, so again, that is why I often say the syllabus we teach, the libraries that we have, is where revival is needed. No, revival, it is here that revival must be conducted. Where we need revivals in Lamka is in the libraries. No? So that's just my opinion. All of this meant that early Zoe scholarship presented very specific and fragmented micro-histories and narratives, again, whose motivations have even contributed to the tribalization of Zoe history. There are many good Zoe scholars teaching in places like Denu and other places who will not accept that we are one group as Zoes, for example. No, they'll be happy to say Mizos are a different group of people, etc., and things like that. And this resulted in the construction of competing narratives that have indirectly served to contest the idea of our Zoe oneness by focusing on the particularities and their contemporary political challenges. And again, this is because academia goes hand in hand with politics. Sometimes we are unable to distinguish between the two. Academics can help politics. Politics can also inform academics, but they can't go together. No? They can go together in some ways parallelly, but they can't go together when you're trying to create an academic work. Okay, so again, this is something that is controversial. We can again talk about it. You probably will might have a different opinion. These post-independence and post-partition discourses, post-partition in the sense of our partition and not India's partition, influence in part the post-colonial and subaltern discourses on power. They tend to develop a revisionist perspective where the idea of an exclusive history is exploited to fuse scholarship and political agendas together. Again, something that I've talked about. And studies such as the subaltern, and I think this is important for us, were not introduced to encompass marginalities such as ours. Okay, subaltern studies is not started to encompass or to help those studies at all. No, I would even go far as saying subaltern studies is not helpful for us. But again, that is a complicated position to take. And so both these forms of scholarship will ultimately unable to capture the sense of an undivided wholeness and shared traditionary practice that tie the Zoe village worlds together. But again, the sad thing is nobody talks about this wholeness and traditionary practice that we have together. Most possibly because we also don't know how to theorize any of this. Anything that the British didn't write about, sometimes we struggle to write by ourselves. No, and the British obviously are not going to know about the intricacies of how our family councils work, for example. And so we need to be able to write them by ourselves. Okay, so that is, in some sense, the laying out of the problematic. Maybe a critical glance at the contemporary Zoe scholars, where I include myself. And here I'm a little bit more critical, just to try and push the point that we need to have a good scholarship. So if the tone is a little bit accusatory, I am included in accusing myself. Okay, so don't misunderstand me. Where is the contemporary Zoe scholar situated in all of this, which is all of us now in the 21st century? Again, here We can see a number of zoo scholars across a number of disciplines. Even today here, I'm sure many of us are from various disciplines, doing work on a variety of topics, maybe even unhindered by the challenges that our predecessors faced, especially with the limitation of archival access and so on and so forth. We have much more access now. We can even get scholarship and travel to places. There are many good scholars who have traveled to Harvard and other places now studying zoo history and things like that. No? So from research on identities from a historical perspective to the study of marriages and kinship, or gender studies, insurgencies in political science, mission movements in theology, etc. We now have a number of scholarship on zoo topics from a range of perspective, often influenced by the discipline under which the scholar is trained, which is a good thing. We are moving towards improving ourselves. But while this increase in research scholars and disciplinary exposure have resulted in the increase in the number of new resources, however, this increase in scholarship has not always led to an increase in the expansion of our perspective about how to interrogate the zoo world, or indeed the possibility of forming a zoo worldview or a zoo way of seeing and writing. Okay, again, I'm not trying to imply that there should be an essential one way of zoo way of seeing. I think that kind of quest for essence is problematic, but I also do not accept that any way of seeing is a zoo way of seeing as long as the seer or the researcher is a zoo. No? Sometimes a zoo writer can see things from a non-zoo perspective. Okay, he can completely miss the point. And I think that the relative position is even more problematic than the search for essences. Again, there are no one essential way of zoo way of seeing, but that is something that we have to strive for. No? So this lag may be, again, because of the continued and practice of uncritically adopting the methodologies of our respective disciplines. This is what I did throughout my master's, etc. When we do research, for example, our supervisors will tell you, this is the topic that I'm interested in. This is the method you're going to use. Very scientific. No, we are not at all interrogating the methodologies that our supervisors give us, for example. And ultimately, we end up propagating some of the reductionist perspective that we want to challenge and say the British are doing to us. No, and you will be. It might sometimes even be funny to find that some of the zoo scholars are more reductive than the British scholars themselves. They are less sensitive than the British scholars themselves. Okay, sometimes the British scholars understand what it means to be a zoo more than the zoo scholars. No, so again, that is for you to see when you read some of the texts. If you scan through a few of the reading lists that you have by zoo scholars, for example, there are many bibliographies. You will be hard-pressed to find scholars who critically engage terminologies such as stripe, insurgency. Insurgency is something that, a term that nobody challenges. And insurgency is a state language to place you in a particular way. No? Again, identity, culture, etc. These are terms that we do not question at all. And so sometimes this is what I mean by adopting the methodologies of our respective disciplines uncritically. Okay, most contemporary scholars are happy to be a voice within their respective disciplines, not by offering new theoretical frameworks or challenging the boundaries and constraints of their respective disciplines, but by simply offering new data. No? So the relevance of existing methodologies were not engaged or interrogated, and we often impose upon the object of research to affirm their utility. Again, we don't need to stress so much on this. Therefore, for us, for most of the zoo scholars in contemporary times, to write often means we are just producing new data. And we are happy to be the voice from the margins because people are now accepting us. We are the voice from the borderlands, etc. And again, very controversial to say, but even in the academia, we are doing the exotic dances to justify people's claim for diversity. Okay, so we are just the people who are accepted in edited books, etc., because people want to be diverse. They want to say that we have included all of these people from all the corners of the world. No, so in the same way that we do these exotic dances in real meetings and not sit on the table, we are now doing these exotic dances in academia. No, and I think this is unacceptable in the 21st century. Also, because methodologically we are just continuing an evolutionary historical development. Okay, so Again, we don't need to go into to that. But again, this is something that is very presumptuous of me to say, and again, you might disagree with me, but I believe that the contemporary scholars are writing neither as social scientists nor as those. Neither as social scientists, because they are not engaging their own foundational presuppositions in their discipline, and they are not writing as those because they are unable to assume the critical posture and approach that enables a reflective analysis and understanding. And again, to stress the point, just because you're a Zoe by blood doesn't mean you're producing Zoe scholarship. No, that is a distinction that I want to make, again, which can be debated. We have academic scholarships. That is why if you notice in what I've shared, I continue to say Zoe scholarship and not Zoe academic discourse, because we have academic scholarship, we have academic writings, but we are yet to have academic discourse. Academic discourse is a completely different, we can say, a different animal. No, discourse means you are, it's almost like you are starting a study where you're having a conversation between scholars, where scholars are critiquing one another. And if you look at the work that is done by those, everybody is very hesitant to criticize one another. They congratulate one another even when they know that the nature or the substance of what is produced is not up to the mark. They'll congratulate one another because even in our cultural, we usually have this position of saying something is better than nothing. No, but in the 21st century, something is not better than nothing. Okay, it has to be much better than that. So sometimes this lack of engagement between those scholars working under the same thematic, combined with their lack of interest in the theoretical foundations of their disciplines, means that most of the Zoe works on Zoe continue to remain isolated, unable to capture the interest and curiosity of the academia at large. And I think this is one of the things that this seminar is trying to address, this problem and lack of engagement. And so these kind of initiatives are very, very important going forward. Although studies, research, and findings increase with a number of theses now being submitted across universities, plenty of theses that are submitted, there is no increased interest in developing a conceptual framework that may be able to tie their interests together. In fact, even today, Zoe discourses are not tied together. It is the Zoes telling them, it is us, the Zoes, who are saying there is Zoe discourse. Nobody else in the academia is saying there is Zoe discourse. Okay, and that is a problem we have to address. So the point is, we need to validate Zoe discourse to the other academic discourses. Okay, so again, for that, you need to develop a scholastic tradition and things like that. It's a very grand phrase, but this is precisely something that we can start with small steps like this, which Zoe Academia-ness and the other groups are doing. So we need to start to write. Yes, we will write individually, but we need to start to write together, think together, work together, because we are all working on the same subject matter. No? So our work should be locatable, not by our names. People shouldn't say this is Zoe scholarship because of our names, but because of our content and our ideas and perspective. Okay, so there is nothing distinctive, again, about Zoe scholarship. Like I said, the question of identity as a reference to Zoe scholarship is notable by its absence. Again, all of this a little bit controversial. Again, let me just read out something that I've written. Probably I shouldn't read it out, but we organize international seminars and conferences, but we do not produce international content. And this is something that I find very helpful, something that I want to encourage scholars such as myself and others, such as those here and listening in. Content precedes network. Okay, in academia, people think network is important, and it is important. You can't survive without network. You have to know how to play the game, but you can survive with limited network. But in academia, you cannot survive without content. Content precedes network. Okay, so write well, train yourself to write well before you collaborate. No, so because ultimately, when you collaborate and you don't have any substantive content to produce, you will find out that people sideline you very, very quickly. No, so have something to show to others. Have a place from where you're speaking, etc. All of this can be summed up in one simple question: are we better scholars than the colonial ethnographers and survivors? Okay, so colonial ethnographers and officers. Can we strive to be better scholars than the colonial ethnographers and surveyors? Again, let me try and wind up the last section I call the task of academic writing. What does it mean for a zoo to write? And what does it mean to write as a zoo? Two separate questions. Again, how do we use our location or positionality as a zoo as the basis upon which we engage? This is simply to say that we need to have a core from which we are speaking. Whenever we are in a dialogue, it doesn't matter whether you're in a political dialogue, it doesn't matter whether you're in a cultural dialogue, academic dialogue. Whenever you're in a dialogue, if you don't have a core from which you're speaking, you will be overwhelmed by the other group. No, if you're in a political dialogue and you have nothing to offer, and the other one is speaking terms to you, then you will adapt to his terms. No, but like for example, if you look at the Nagas, they always have some non-negotiables. For example, no, this is non-negotiable, this is non-negotiable, this is the Naga core from which we speak. Other things we can talk about shared sovereignty and things like that, but there are some non-negotiables. We are not Indians, we are never Indians and things like that. No, so in the same way in academia, we need to have a core from which we engage the other. And the other, by other, I mean our disciplines. Whether you're in pol science, whether you're in anthropology, etc., you need to have a core from which you engage these disciplines. And that is the center from which you speak. Again, those centers will be very varied, but you need to find them. Okay, and that is the first step to writing as a zoo, at least according to me. Again, something that I already mentioned, the very act of writing for the zoos is very complicated because it involves several tasks. One is, before we write, we have to internalize and engage the accounts of the British, why they are accepted in the world of literature that we are unaware of, etc., and things like that. We need to critically evaluate all of this before we write our own narratives and lived practices. So we engage the British sources, we look at our own lived realities and say, look, what they've written us about us does not justify my lived practices. And so you also need to write about their lived practices. No? So far, what is happening is, even post-colonial scholars, many of them teaching in different places, so far they are just reacting to the British sources. So far, what we are saying is, the British have written this and it's wrong. No, but we have not produced anything else to support that. Okay, so now is the time to try and write about our Zoal and say the British accounts are wrong, or the British accounts are limited based on my development of this zoo world, my development of this zoo practice, zoo culture, zoo belief, etc., and things like that. Okay, so at least that is how I see it. So we all have that responsibility of knowing, again, for the zoo scholarship and even education is therefore intrinsically an endeavor of negotiation. That is why we cannot strictly be subaltern or post-colonial, because we need to negotiate both of them. So so while we may seem to be very certain about our identity in our everyday lived world and languages, in the world of discourse, we need to follow up such assertions and claims with validations and justifications. And again here, maybe to quickly come to a conclusion, we need to make a distinction or understand the distinction between our world and the academic world. And this is something that many phenomenologists, for example, have written about. The world of discourse is a completely different world. Okay, that is why we need to learn new languages. The English is different, the terms are different, etc., because it's a new world. We have our lived practices. We need to justify those lived practices in the world of discourse. If you're not in academia, you don't need to justify. But in academia, you need to justify. And good societies are run on people who are able to justify that. No? If you look at some of the countries that are doing really, really well, they are doing well because the people who are providing the foundations for the things they say, the debates they have, are all intellectuals. No? So they respect the place of intellectuals. Again, let's not go into detail. Let me just give an example just to end. To be a zoo scholar, in my case, for example, is to be necessarily dialogic or comparative. We cannot afford not to be comparative. And this has important conceptual or methodological implications. For example, I'm in the philosophy department, or if you're a student of philosophy, say working on Continental or working on Foucault or something, I have the responsibility first of becoming a Foucault scholar. No, you have to first understand Foucault fully before you can talk about a Foucauldian perspective of the zoo or something like that. No? So that is our responsibility. And if we don't understand, the problem sometimes I have, that many of us have, is neither understand Foucault enough or our own societies enough. That is why I said we are neither writing as social scientists or people in the humanities, nor as those. And that is something that we have to correct, especially in the 21st century. Okay, so to end, one of the questions that we can think about in our writing is, whenever we are writing, and this includes not only writing, but even when we are speaking, even when we are behaving, even when we say my aim in life is this, etc., which tradition of thought is informing that perspective? Okay, if you say I want to be an IS, what perspective is informing that line of thinking? No, if you want to say I want to be a theologian, there is a tradition of thought that is informing you, and it is important for us to realize that once we understand where we are coming from, and then to see if that has anything so to do with it. No, and so if you just ask around people and say what is your aim in life, none of them, or at least a majority of them, will not give you a so response to that. Okay, they will give you a very secular theological answer to that, perhaps. No, so the idea is we need to introspect and try and find out which tradition of thought is informing our thinking, our being, our acting, our way of talking, our way of dressing, etc. And for us, most importantly, our writing. There are some things that I've written, but I think we can discuss that in the next session. No, thanks everyone. Thanks for listening.
Now we have a few minutes left, so I'll open question. Anyone who have question online and offline, 2% can ask. The offline participants, 2% can ask, and 2% from online can ask the resource person if they have any questions regarding his talk. Online. Okay, the online participant can start with their question.
Am I visible, audible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so I have two quick questions, more anthropological. So we're all talking about, let's say, methodology, for instance, ethnographic approach, qualitative stuff. I've been always wondering, like, the the I don't know, like, I don't know how to put it, but it might be this problem of the othering, because for instance, when you do an insider, perspective of your own community that you have been, you have yourself been part of since you were a kid. So I have all I wasn't wondering, like, how do you make sense of the other in a way that you don't uh, maybe exert or maybe even bring these problems of power relations, because the ethnographer is always in the position of power, like positionality comes into play again. So how is there a way of, like, being embedded and also maybe embodied in the in I don't know, like, maybe a way of doing these as a way of doing this, I don't know, like. So my concern is the question of the othering when you are doing your own like ethnographic work, especially in the context of the social society. And the second would be question of vulnerability, because uh, especially in the context of India, when people, we are like people coming from marginalized society, and we go to some other universities across the country, and we feel insecure at some point to talk about our own identities. And the question of vulnerability, especially not only in ethnographic works, but across different fields, especially in social sciences, comes in. But in the specifically in ethnographic works, I'm interested in understanding, like, how do you make use of your vulnerability to bring more, maybe to make more sense of your own experience, maybe institutional experience, or maybe field experience back at home if you're doing ethnographic work, and then coming back again to institutions where you feel kind of vulnerable again to talk about their own identity, because we see that at least for me, I see many people from the Northeast kind of struggle to talk about their own, take space or claim space in educational institutions. So I was wondering, like, is there a way of making use of these vulnerabilities and maybe come up with more thick description of the field, or yeah.
I think both the questions are somewhat related. If I heard you correctly, maybe we can start with maybe the second one, where you talked about vulnerability, especially again in doing PhD and other courses and so on. One of the things that I've been taught very early on when I was doing my PhD, for example, is a PhD is about me. No, it's not about the topic that I'm. One of the things that I quickly have to realize is the journey is about me. I'm trying to transform the way I see, trying to enlarge my conceptual visions, trying to understand how I've been looking at things, how I can look at things, etc. And so, in that sense, whether you're feeling vulnerable as a marginal community, or whether you feel you have nothing to say, etc., all of those comes into actually making your research unique, because ultimately you're trying to find yourselves. No, and if that is why sometimes in most places when they talk about scholars, for example, they say someone who's not done a PhD is not a scholar, because when you do a PhD, you are transformed. No? The way you look at your family, the way you look at work, etc., gets transformed, hopefully for the better. In those situations, I think feelings of vulnerability, especially as marginal communities, and which is what is I feel is related to your first point as well, is important, because nowadays in scholarship, usually when we think of scholarship, our idea of thinking about research, for example, is there is someone who is doing research. There are the people who are researched upon, for example. There are a group of people in the villages. There is the scholar who will do in research, etc. And what is happening now, and where even disciplines like theology are becoming very important, is now what is really important in academics is the critical insider. No, the voice of the insider sells a lot now, because he has insights that other people from outside that community, what we can call an outsider, does not necessarily have. So in a sense, we as those have some insights that the British will never have, that we can agree. But can we critically talk about those in a way in which, first, of course, that is academic standard worthy, but also in a way in which, although we are the subject studying about our own selves, we can be objective enough to try and talk about the insights from what we are studying. No? So the idea of the critical insider is now, I think there are many scholars now talking about the importance of the critical insider. That's why someone who has been, like, for example, if you look at some universities, especially in Buddhist studies, for example, you will have scholars who are dressed as Buddhists, no? Who are Buddhist, practicing Buddhists. You have now in theology, you always had what they call practitioner scholars, people who are Christians, who have been practicing Christianity, who have worked with World Vision for 10, 20 years, etc., and things like that, are now doing research. And now there is much more respect given to people who study their own traditions, like Buddhists studying Buddhism, if they can live up to the standards of academia. No, the problem before was that they were not able to live up to the standards of academia. But now, if you just Google, if you just go to YouTube, also some of the sadhus who are talking about Hinduism in YouTube, for example, very, very good academic language, for example. No? So those kind of people, the point that I'm trying to make is, being an insider, being vulnerable, bringing our location into it, is actually a strength that we can use, as long as we don't give up on the standards of academia. And again, I think that the question of the othering, there is a way in which we can say, whenever we are doing research, there is power play. And I think we have to be careful about how you understand power play. Like, for example, just because I am now sharing and you are listening doesn't mean I'm in a position of power. No, just because you are researching and upon people who are not doing research doesn't mean you are using, doesn't mean the relationship is power play necessarily. It depends on what is happening in the relationship. Okay, so I think we have to be careful when we try and see everything as just because we are more privileged, just because we are using English, just because you're using academic language, doesn't mean when you're trying to help other people understand, for example, doesn't mean that there's power play involved. No, even if it is a power play, it is a very different kind of positive power play going on. And I think that is where we don't need to worry so much about the question of the othering also that you mentioned, because sometimes even in our like, for example, people like Paul Ricoeur will say, even when we self introspect, we become the other for our own self sometimes, no, and that doesn't necessarily mean we are objectifying ourselves, etc. I don't know if that answers the question, but I'm just going around mumbling, no.
Yeah, it's helpful. Thank you so much. Yeah.
We'll take one more question from the online participants, if there is any.
Yeah. So I like to. Yeah, am I visible? I hope I'm audible. Hello. Yeah, somehow my video is not coming. Yeah. Am I audible anyway?
Yeah, Henry, you're audible.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Thanks for the clarification. Yes. Thank you, Zoe Academy, and thank you, Sam, for the refreshing talk once again. It's always nice to hear from you about perspectives and things like this. I am very much intrigued by one thing that you mentioned, and although we have had a lot of discussions regarding all this kind of scholarship before, something regarding what's to do with academia and politics. So in our case, somehow, to me, when we say Zoe scholarship and or Zoe Academy, I don't know, but what's embedded in the question always is the question of what is Zoe narrative, you know. So in as much as we ask today ourselves what is Zoe scholarship, I think the question of what is Zoe narrative should always be there, or is always embedded. I don't know what the rest of us think. This is again, if we look at it, but then all of us, a lot of us have started in such a way that
Okay,
we
excuse me, Henry,
yeah.
can you go slower because there's lots of echo around here?
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah. So I'm just speaking out loud from here. Okay. Let me try to go slower. The typing would have been better, but so when we say Zoe scholarship, I think for me, what is embedded in asking what Zoe scholarship is always the question of what is the narrative in Zoe scholarship, or what is Zoe narrative. So in that sense, politics is very much integral to the idea of what Zoe academia is, or what Zoe scholarship is, in one way or the other. Of course, I pretty much agree to what you said, what Sam said about politics and academics cannot go together in such a way. Of course, it can influence one another, but it may not always go parallel in such a way that academic or political biases come in academic discourses or academic writings, and then it sort of taints or it's sort of um, out. It's sort of, I don't know how to put this, but it's sort of impurifies, so to say, or what scholarship should really be in that sense. But not. We also have to take into account here, like what we do in those scholarship is not just all about accounting our history or culture or what has been written about us or of us in the past. Not necessarily. That's not always what those scholarship is. It could be about very much more about the present day, and we trying to reclaim whatever that was. And to this, I'd also want to come back to how we look at the say we always talked about in such a for now very much later in those academia, so to say, or in those scholarships, how the British have misrepresented us, or how the colonizers have thought about us in such a way that it's not very much true to what our lived experiences tell us. But although there sometimes I feel like we may be overly critical in such a way that we can always think in such a way that if those accounts of us have not been written, of course I may be playing the devil advocate here. Would we even care to write about what they have been writing about us today? So that also comes in again. Let me just add in a lot of other things too as well. But then again, I'm also very much uh, um, not happy or so to say um, very critical also to say how the British have written about us. Of course, I'm not saying that they're always right, but I think it's important that we acknowledge their scholarship in such a way that and that they do it. Of course, they do it to suit their narrative of whatever the empire trying to justify all of its misdeeds. But that also, in a way, starts what we is important for the start of what we today call those scholarships in a way, rather to challenge what has been said. Yeah.
Henry, I didn't get most of what you said.
Okay, I'm mumbling, so I'm sorry. Yeah.
But there are some points I think you mentioned about academia and politics.
Yeah,
If I got it correctly, you said politics is integral to academia, huh? And then the last
yeah.
part,
No. So integral in the sense of the narrative part.
and then in the
So
last part you.
let me type this here.
And I think in the last part you mentioned about I mean about giving due credit to the scholarship that has been done, no?
Yes.
Okay.
Not over, not in a not such a way that it's uncritical, but at some point we have to acknowledge what they have written about us also, right?
Okay. Let me just try and address those two because that's
Yeah.
your microphone is not very clear, no? So we can't hear you
Oh, I'm
properly.
sorry.
But you can still write it down if you want. We can talk about it later.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Others can take the stage. Yeah.
Again,
Whatever you hear of it, that's fine.
yeah. Again, regarding academia and politics, I think, like I said, what I'm trying to do is trying to push some controversial issues just for discussions, which we are doing now. But I do agree in the sense academia for us is already a political act. The fact that we are writing is already a political act because we are trying to negotiate our marginality, not only in the academics, but in various ways. No, but I'm trying to make a distinction between, see, if we are very honest, the point that I'm trying to make is, can we write a text or a work that is so good academically that nobody knows it's politically oriented? No, because ultimately it will always be politically oriented. You will always be informed by how you view at politics. But there's an academic way of writing that, no? And the examples I gave, like for example, the examples which I didn't give, but which Bianca gave about her death and so forth, where she says it's not critical enough, has to stand because they are very clear that they are not writing to an academic audience, no? And again, when we write text, even here, if you look at the way we've been writing text, not many texts are in some sense written for the academic audience, even now, even what we call scholarships, etc. No, so it depends on who the audience is, etc. But I guess that's what I can say about academia and politics. On the other issue of we have to give due credit, I agree, because whatever is written is the source that we have. Even if somebody has compiled an autobiography, that is the source that we have to use. But the point that I want to stress and the point I want to push is, in the 21st century, we have to convert those into academic works. No, so that's the only point. Not to dismiss what has been written, but to say that look our responsibility now, at least in the 21st century, with all the access that none of our predecessors have. We don't have any excuse not to be more academically oriented than we are now. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah,
but,
I'm sorry. Yes, that's understood. Thanks. Yeah.
Usam, I just have a question. If you can allow me, just a few moments. Sam, Monte from him, Monte. Hello. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. If I may proceed, I would like to ask you a question. In the talks you have mentioned somewhere, you have mentioned that our identity or indigeneity has been going away, or I don't know how to put it, but you have mentioned that our identity, or yes, again, the indigeneity has been no longer in use, something like that. I couldn't recall it appropriately or accordingly. Could you please make some statement on this? Thank you.
I think Henry should make a statement on this because he's the one who made that claim, no? But the point that he was trying to make is when we are talking about indigeneity, if you look at indigenous people who claim to be the indigenous communities, and people who are doing scholarship on that, for example, they speak about I've given examples of, they speak about their relationship with land. For example, if you look at what we normally call through the movies the Red Indians, for example, their relationship with land, the sacredness of the rivers, etc., and all of those relationships in our current context are, at least in the academia, slowly missing. No, the point that we want to raise is not that we are not indigenous, because if you look at our pre-colonial world, we are very, very indigenous, but we are not the same anymore. And if we were to try and point out anyone who respects rivers, it will be very difficult, because look at the way we treat our rivers, for example. No, if we look at the way we treat our animals, the way we treat our birds, for example, most of which we can't even see anymore. We don't have any relationship with them anymore. No, so the point is just to share that that kind of relationship is diminishing, especially also because of the nature of scholarship that we are doing, etc., and because of what is happening through the change in modernity and things like that. No, so just to say that in our current context, to try and still claim that we are indigenous, we can still claim if we are talking about some pre-colonial roots. But if people were to see examples of what makes us indigenous, we will have to refer to our songs rather than our lived realities now. So that's the point that I think.
Okay. Is there any political reason on this? Just not just the natural thing, but apart from the natural entity, is there any political reason on this?
We need to be indigenous for political reasons, for sure, because we want our cases to be heard by usually the reason why affiliating with indigenous groups, etc., and the reason for having indigenous foundations, etc., and all of that is important for us, because we actually want to use them as pressure points for our conversations or dialogues with the government. No, so there are political reasons of why we use, but do we want to be indigenous enough is the question that we all. It is easy to set up an indigenous society or indigenous NGOs. Nowadays, you can set up almost anything, but we usually set that up for political reasons. The question is, do we want to really be indigenous enough? Because if we want to, then our architectures will change. No, we won't be sitting in buildings like this. We will be probably in bamboo huts or something like that. No, so.
Thanks, Usam.
We will stop the question for the online participant for now. Thank you to the all online participant for asking the question. Now we'll open some time for the live participant to ask question if they have.
Thanks, Sam, for such an insightful and thought-provoking presentation, I would say. On the question of Zhou indigeneity and discourse, that is also one of the, I think, the most important topics that we have to engage if we are to survive politically and as a society also, I think, in the future. But the question of the difficulty is the how part, no? Because we are, as we wrote in the concept note, we are entangled in layers of histories and entangles of many events together, pre-colonial, post-colonial, and coloniality and such things. And on the one hand, modernity, post-modernity, and all these things. Capitalism, industrialization, and capitalism, all this come up. And we are caught up in that situation. The reason that I said is now our society is very fastly moving towards a, what do we call, very capitalistic society in a sense. For example, the kind of land rush that we are experiencing in, you know, and with that kind of force, how are we engaging with Zhou indigeneity? You know, can we imagine probably a new way of adapting indigeneity into this modern context, in our contemporary context? That is, if you have any thoughts, and also on the other part, the Zhou discourse. When we talk about the Zhou discourse, discrediting, of course, we have to engage with the colonial writings and all these things. But then also those, we have to discredit it because of the epistemic approach and the methodological that I applied. And then when we are going back to the pre-colonial Zhou epistemic of understanding, that is, we understand that it is oral tradition. But then those oral material data has been vanishing because the old age are going very fast. We won't be able to trace such a huge data, thick data from there now. In one instance, one elder told me that we have like the kind of Hindu who said who can trace back the genealogy. We have a tulpi, a concept of tulpi in its house or its clan, you know. That tulpi, the tulpi responsibilities to know it's every person by name, descendant down from generation and generation. He has to know the names, the daughters, the son, and all these things. That tulpi has to know it. And now we don't have all these things now. It's vanishing. Only very few families would have that. So within that material scarcity of the indigeneity parts, how are we going to develop, you know, the discourse of Zhou discourse or Zhou epistemic? Yeah.
You pointed out the important points very well, and the question is difficult because how do we do that is the question that I myself am asking. No, when you talked about Zhou indigeneity, for example, again, yes, the discussion can continue in the sense that we can talk about Zhou indigeneity, but we are not living as indigenous communities anymore. No, we are probably more capitalistic than even most tribals elsewhere and things like that. And so we need to negotiate that. And again, here also related to Zhou discourse, maybe true. That is why I talked about the idea of, I don't know if I talked about, I've mentioned conceptual framework, the substantive and conceptual contribution. Because like rightly you pointed out, if we take an example, when we look at the colonial writings, the problem is not the content. The problem is the method. And that is why I keep saying we need to master our disciplines, because the methods that they are teaching us are the problem. No? So when we look at colonial writing, we cannot just say these are colonial writings. What is informing that colonial writing? Is the Enlightenment evolutionary model, for example. That is one example. So in that ways, one of the reasons why studying philosophy is interesting, because you are questioning, trying to understand the presuppositions. No, you are not asking if somebody says something. You are not saying what did he say. In philosophy, the question you are asking is why is he saying what he's saying? Where is he coming from? No, and that model is helpful also in the academia, because in those studies, etc., because that is where the battle is. We need to deconstruct colonial school of thought by using new methods, not by using new data. Data in and of itself doesn't change the conversation, and I think that is an important distinction. That is why again, related to discourse and indigeneity, we need now to have a new method where we can talk about zoe-indigeneity. Yes, most of the things are gone, but only if you're interested in field work, no? But there are many things which are also not gone. The songs are still there. The songs will never go. Word is something that will always remain, no? So there are things that are always, but what we need is some sort of a paradigm shift where people appreciate the importance of preserving all of this. That can only happen if you master your methods. So it is related. If you are a very, very good scholar who is introducing a new method, then maybe we will have some pride in talking about all of this, talking about our indigeneity, because we now have a method of how to talk about them. And that is why, for me, the push is let us come up with new methods. New data, you will always find exotic data everywhere. The data in and of itself doesn't say anything. It's how you interpret and present the data. No? So that is something, again, it's still, the question is still, how do we do that? And for me, that is why one way of doing that, at least for me, is you become good in your disciplines. If you are in philosophy, you are the guy who masters philosophy, no? And then, because once you master philosophy, you will realize that this philosophy has nothing to do with the zoes. Or you might say some of this philosophy is related to the zoes, etc. You will be able to categorize what is helpful and what is not helpful. Unless we are able to do that at the academic level, we will always be using what people give us. If your supervisor says, use this method, we'll just use it. Just finish it off, get the degree, etc. No? But that will not preserve our identity. So it's a difficult claim to make, but you can preserve your indigeneity through academic discourse, but only if we give, in some sense, some respect to academic discourse. So.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Okay. If not, we will close the first session here. Thank you to all the participants who have asked questions, who have listened, and to our resource person, Dr. Samuel, for his valuable insights. And before closing the session, I would like to announce one important is that we can use the offline participants if we are more comfortable in using our own local language. We can do the discussion using our own local language. And in session 2, we will come back after 15 minutes, and it will be divided into 2 groups, and we will have separate parallel discussions for 40 minutes. We can do that in our own local language. And thank you. We will end our session here.